see. You can see Tink and her child there. All right. You can see Kylie and her big puffer. Okay, so metta. So let's dive into metta. I think sometimes these Buddhist phrases or these words like love or goodwill or care, they can get very tired. You know, we hear them all the time. And I think so we need to often inject these words back with freshness to get them out of the cliche and the aeroplane like music. You can get tired of hearing these words like, yeah. So why do I feel metta is so important? This word metta, I think that metta is so helpful to us when we're beginning to navigate the inner life and all that we have to meet and see in ourselves, and all that we have to be with as a human being. And when we're willing to eyeball our own situation, what we actually feel. And I also think just looking at the world situation at the moment, you know, to meet what's happening with COVID-19, to be able to meet what's happening in the environmental crisis, to be able to keep steady with this, you know, pretty extreme world situation, and to stay open, to stay awake. I think metta, for that clear gaze on life, is like a balm. You know, and it's sometimes said when we don't have metta or that warmth and we're practicing, it can be almost like putting ourselves in a blender. It's what Pema Chodron sometimes said. Without metta, it can be almost like putting ourselves in a blender. So we need to dig into this warmth. So metta, as many of you know, and I explored this a lot last year in the Deep Springs course, that metta, it's one of the Brahma Viharas, and these are the teachings of the heart, of the teachings which point to the maturation of the human heart, and metta being one of them. And the Brahma Viharas that are these teachings, they're translated, as many of you know, as divine abodes. And it's said that we visit these homes of loving kindness, metta, and then of compassion or of deep calm or of joy, that we visit them, but then we get kicked out of them very quickly. And part of a metta practice is we're learning to stay there more and more. And yeah, I was thinking it's a little bit like, I was remembering being a kid, and my sister will remember this too, growing up in our neighbourhood, and there was a period where there was some really troubling things happening in the neighbourhood, and there was a lot of men, and apparently they were in white cars that were coming along and trying to get kids to come into their cars. And I remember at this time that the council put forward this new idea about safety houses. Do you guys remember that? There was these safety houses on houses where if you were ever in trouble, you could go inside them, and they were they'd have this yellow triangle just out the front of the fence. And so you'd be walking home from school as a kid, and you'd have some of these, you know, frightening images in your mind. And then I remember I'd like sprint, and I'd land at a safety house, and you knew that you could go in there and it would be friendly. You could get an icy pole, you know, or a cup of tea. And so you could stop by a safety house and then run, and then you see another safety house. Anyway, so the Brahma Viharas are a little like these safety houses, that they're places that actually kind of want you to come in and to welcome you like your own heart. And as I said, that we enter, and then sometimes we just get kicked out again, and we're back spinning almost in the back lanes of our own minds, in the habitual tendencies of our own minds that keep us out of our ease and our connection to our heart. in a sense, we could say that the metta is wanting to draw us out of the cold, the image, like to come back and just to sit by a fire. And the word for the Brahma Viharas, the intention of them, is something called Sama Samveda. It's a Pali word, which means to break through borders, to move through walls. It says that the Brahma Viharas and Metta being one of them are the great removers of tension and of stress. When our heart starts softening, what can free up in the being? It said that not only do they break through our own personal walls, where we're not accessible to ourselves, where we're arid internally or dry or cut off, but they can also break through the walls between us as people. And so psychologically, but also politically, that they can break through, the borders between countries, if we can start to really generate this heart and this fellow feeling and this care. So metta, it's translated in the Pali word as loving kindness, and in the Sanskrit word, the word which I love is maitri, and maitri pretty much means, in practice, to begin to learn what it is to have an unconditional openness to our own experience. And this is almost, and the image of metta, it is like being a mother, like, and for all of us as a man or a woman, we could say a mother or a father to our own experience, like the wing even of like a bird, like coming over its young. So we're looking after the child of our own wild, unpredictable, very human experience. That kind of openness. It's the sister word to metta is something called Metta, and Metta means friend. So metta is some easy attitude of friendliness to our own life and to the life around us. Friendliness. So we could say it's empowering the inner friend. And the practices of metta, it's called metta bhavana, and bhavana means method, that we begin with ourself, that we begin learning this foundation of having some friendliness and warmth to just ourself, and how important that is, and how so often, we kick ourselves out of our own home. And then once we begin with ourself, we start to extend that. So we get a little more kind of courage that then you'll extend that in a practice to someone you actually feel sort of easy towards, that doesn't, trigger you or make it's not too hard. And then that you move your feeling to someone that you feel indifferent towards, someone, all the people that maybe you walk down the street and don't really notice, that we're actually asked to wake up, to be more sensitive to really what and who is around us, to widen our care. And then we're asked to move our feeling to people that we actually find it very difficult to be with. It's like a progression, that to turn around from our habit of running and actually stay and extend the heart. And then it just gets wider and wider. The full extension of metta is said to be grown great, measureless, boundless, limitless, so kind of charged, that the capacity of our human heart, we could say, you can see that sometimes in Bob Marley when he was singing and bringing warring fractions together down in the ghettos, where he would there was one concert where he was almost scared he was going to get shot, and he just opened his being and just extended that kind of quality. You see it in artists sometimes, some feeling, and we can all feel it when we're in some kind of flow. We're not so restricted, sometimes people, I think that's why people love alcohol, in Australia, because it sort of softens the edges, and you're sort of flowing with people a little bit easier. And, I remember that as a child, as a young teenager, drinking and loving that feeling. The edge is loose and we're all in this together. And so the whole movement of metta is to sort of find a feeling that we are all in this together. And that's a phrase that's sometimes being put forward in this COVID-19 time, we're all in this together. But I think when we look a little bit deeper, we can sort of see, well, in fact, lots of us kind of are not all in this together, and that we can see that the cracks in the capitalism and in our culture that COVID-19 has highlighted, to see there's definitely some of us are a lot more protected than others, and how much of a deeper need there is for this kind of practice of a genuine beginning to extend ourselves in heart and mind and action wider. So the movement of metta is some, ideal pathway, we could say, to some feeling that we're all in this together, knowing that in reality, there's a lot of ways as a global community that we're not. So it said that metta, it's like rain. I use that metaphor in a practice. It's like rain. It falls everywhere. It doesn't choose, I'm just going to land here and I'm not going to land there. It falls equally. I think something about metta, it's like we don't have to wait till we're all sorted to offer ourselves that kind of care. Sometimes we think, yeah, okay, I'll be able to sort of offer or feel good about myself when I'm kind of sorted or solved or in some kind of ideal place. But actually, when we usually need metta the most is when in those places where we're not sorted, where we're incredibly awkward, or we're grieving, or we're strange, or we're disconnected. So metta is learning to open to all of those aspects of our experience. In fact, metta, it's sometimes said that sometimes we find it in those very dark nights. We find it because sometimes when we're so exhausted from harassing ourselves or from being in conflict that we finally give in and we're open to some kind of forgiveness or to receive love in some way. And our resistance sort of drops, and then we can feel it, a bit like mercy, So it's as I said, so sometimes a Tibetan language for coming upon metta, that sometimes we find the jewel of our own heart, our own capacity to be with ourselves, to be loyal to our experience, to not abandon our experience when we most need ourselves. And it's a practice, because our aversion when we're uncomfortable is to leave, is to exit. So to stay. It said it's like sometimes finding a jewel in a pile of filth. So it doesn't always just come in this pretty kind of way, it can come like in our tough moments. Well, I said that strongly, didn't I? Tough moment. It can come, like it comes sometimes when we're under real duress and demand that we have to open. What else is there to do? I'm just going to stay here gripping on, or I'm actually going to start to trust. Something about metta is that we're learning to be mobilized not by aggression, but by love. The image I sometimes have of metta, strong image of like a lot of people slowly coming out of the dark and sitting by a fire. And I think as a human being, aware I don't have a lot of time, and I always have a lot to say about this, I get speedy, but aware as a human being, when you're sitting around a fire and there's music and it's really nourishing and you feel warm and you're with other people, you can't really buy that feeling. That's a very basic good feeling. And metta is something about coming back to let yourself come out of the cold and take your place around that fire. And as I said, the aspects of ourselves that need to sit around that fire, sometimes it's, the really full-on parts, or the exhausted parts, or the hopeless parts, that fire, like I said, Maitri has something unconditional about it. I think something very powerful about metta is that also to to keep seeing, as I was mentioning at the beginning, everything that we need to see about ourselves as we start practicing, as we get more sensitive to suffering internally and externally. We could think of metta sometimes as, we think of loving kindness, that sounds sort of weak and maybe fluffy, but the warmth needed to keep seeing clearly and to be awake, I don't think we can underestimate that. I think the warmth helps us sustain our capacity to change. The warmth to be able to see where in our own self that maybe we are a bit weak, where we are not so developed, to feel sometimes where we might fall short, where we feel the limits of our own friendliness to ourselves and those around us. That takes a lot of power. Who's the Prime Minister of England? What's his name? I really like that. The one from long time ago. Churchill. He would say, like, it takes a strong man to say sorry and to acknowledge, where you haven't been able to extend your gaze and your care and your real feeling for those around you. So the metta helps us, stay awake. And so part of the full extension of metta, including ourselves in our own frame of care, and then widening that to include others in our frame of care, is so interesting. Like I just read the other day about how apparently, more attractive looking people get more empathy, just by the way they look, that we'll actually give our attention there, like I said, and just be indifferent to others walking by. And we all know what it feels like when we're held in a warm gaze, or we're held in an indifferent gaze. We affect each other so much by the quality of our own gaze. So when we also start to look at our own limitations of our heart, when we start to see maybe the way we are subtly, knowingly or unknowingly complicit in this wider suffering in this culture. One Lama from America who I respect, his name is Lama Rod Owens, and he identifies himself as a queer Black African American Dharma teacher, and he speaks about the limits and how we all have to look at our own racism, and that not being just a simplistic hatred. Usually it's not just something always overt, but that sometimes this broad sympathy we can have to certain people, and then this skepticism even towards others, so just the way we're orientated to difference around us, and this to start to look at in ourselves, or we could say our unconscious biases, our minor aggressions, our tendency to exert control over cultural norms and places. So, what we have to see in ourselves. Because I also think it's like what we see outside in the world, we also find in ourself, our own fears, our own, where we fall short, where we numb out, where we hold back, where we tense, where we hide from participating in a wider way. So metta, as we're seeing, as we're looking with this insight, that practice to start to see into our experience, and that's another conversation, really, what insight is, because that's so essential. But the metta, it's like an inner balm, that how can we keep regenerating and nourishing ourselves and others as we keep waking up. And I think sometimes it's sometimes we're kind of as we look at what's cracked up inside us and what's cracked up outside of us in the world, that we need this metta to face that clearly without shame and stay steady. And so metta, I think I've come upon this, I don't need metta, I just can march on. But I think it's almost arrogant to think that we can march on alone without soothing, that we are so interdependent, we are part of such a wider network, and that we all need this basic nourishment, you know, of the earth, of our own heart, of others, of this care, how much we can grow when we're held in that. And that's what a sangha, a community, is kind of trying to ballast or do. Because to keep sort of softening on edges and not holding back and kind of finding our territory and claiming ourselves and our space and, you know, pushing other people out, you go away, you're not welcome, you know, I'm keeping my borders really tight. You know, it's a very human instinct. So metta. I wonder how we're going for time. Oh yeah, okay, a few more words. Are you all still here? We're going. Okay, just a few more words. So Metta, I was listening to this conversation about two women artists, Rebecca Solnit and another woman, I just forgot her name. And I was loving this conversation, but talking about there's a really human tendency in times of crisis to go into what's, you know, we speak, there's trauma has become such a big word lately. I hear it all the time. Trauma, we have this tendency in crisis when the heat's on to go into fight or flight. But there was a woman in Fiji, a climate activist, who said the other option, which is very in line with a Buddhist notion practice, is to tend and befriend, and that rather than to pull away or to turn away when we're in uncomfortable situations, but to tend to and befriend and to actually enter the collective more and to enter our relationality more rather than isolating ourselves. And that there is something regenerative that can happen in a crisis. I just have to skip through, I had quite a bit more. Yeah, and that we have seen a lot of this happening just through this time of COVID-19, of people caring for each other. Apparently in one factory, that people that wanted to really make sure that the medical people had masks. I don't know where this was, maybe it was even in India, but 30 men, because they didn't want to get sick and they wanted to make sure that people had masks, locked themselves in a factory for 30 days. And so they could produce as many as they could. So this huge service coming out of this time. And that's just one example, but I know there's been so many people coming together in care through this time. Just another quick image, like after September 11, apparently that everybody wanted to give blood to all the injured people. You know, sometimes these things bring out the best in us too. Apparently there was people giving blood, that this blood that people were giving would have filled an Olympian swimming pool. So in crisis, to be regenerative, not to get more stingy, that we can use even the space now that we're given to seize it, this pause, to ask ourselves, how do I want to keep living? What's kind of been brought to light in this time for me? Okay. I think I'm going to have to leave it pretty soon, but there's a lot more that I was going to say. Maybe there'll have to be part 2 of this talk. I just wanted to say one other thing that's really interesting, because I think sometimes we can fear kindness, and sometimes it's almost seen as a sort of a non-masculine quality. And it was interesting because there were these statistics done about men wearing masks and washing hands through COVID-19, that was seen that it could almost be wimpy, like emasculating. And like, how weird is that it's emasculating to actually care, you know? And so I just think that what is it to bring together these qualities of real potency and uprightness, but also softness and love, and to feel the potency in actual care. That's sort of going into another bigger conversation, but I think that's fascinating, you know, that somehow to be kind of like masculine, we can think about the way the patriarch kind of disfigures all of us, is to be kind of like cut off and on your own and isolated and moving on and sort of like out of the collective, but to be able to find that potency and warmth at the same time, like in the sitting posture, to be upright, but also find this surrender, to weave these qualities together, that we need this warmth rising up to straighten up. Power of metta, warmth, tenderness. Okay. So it's said that, like I said, when metta enters our practice, as the sutta, the Buddha said, no other method is even like 1/16th worth of when metta kicks in. The Buddha said that. I don't know where he got 1/16th somewhere, but he said, like after autumn and a monsoon, like after you've maybe been having a difficult time and some heart comes back, how powerful that is, like the sun dispelling dark from the sky, or like the star, the first star rising out of the dawn. So thank you all for your good ears and your listening. I can't see Kate again. I did want to say more. I wanted to write like how speak a little bit more, and maybe next time about the notion of encouragement and encouraging each other to keep following this metta, to the power we can have to yet rewrite the future, that we can use this pause and gap to keep bringing ourselves through in the way each of us might do that, our own contribution to the collective as artists, or as whatever realm we work in and contribute, to keep going, to keep your voices coming. Yeah. Yes, to keep coming. There's so many big voices in the mainstream, and we need everybody's voices to keep lining up with what you really value and care for, bringing that through. And the encouragement we all need for that, to live our own congruent life. Okay, Kate, I think that's it. So yeah, thank you for your good ears.